we can get started, but there's all these people coming in.
We could also get started, Claire, just because we only have an hour and people can catch up later too.
Yeah, certainly don't want to waste anyone's time. So yeah, let's get started, and then Lauren will keep adding people as they come in a few minutes late. Welcome to everyone who's here for the VOREC Community Grant Programs webinar for the 2023 grant round. We're really excited to see all of these faces, or names really, not at this point, there's no faces besides ours. As Jackie said, some familiar, some unfamiliar, and that's something that's really excited. We want to continue supporting communities across Vermont and support new organizations and new communities as well. Just for some housekeeping for all of you, the meeting is being recorded and transcribed and will be posted on the website after we are done today. So don't say anything that you don't want forever on the internet. If you need closed captioning, you can turn it on through the 3 dots and the more, and then to go to language settings and then turn on live captioning. And if you need translation of this, or one of your partners needs translation, you can call our language services, which is at 802-636-7827, and that number is on the next slide, so don't worry if you didn't write it down. All of you have your videos off. Please keep them off until you ask a question, because we all know people's bandwidths are limited in parts of rural Vermont. My name is Claire Polfus. I'm the Recreation Program Manager for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. I'll be doing the talking during the presentation part of today, but I have my 2 colleagues here helping me out. So Jackie Dagger is the VOREC Program Manager, and she'll be helping answer questions. And Lauren Pyle is our new Outdoor Recreation Grants Manager. And she'll be running the show, all the stuff behind the scenes. If you have questions, we're going to save them for the end, but if you would like to put them into chat, go ahead, and then Lauren will compile them for the question and answer period. With that, let's get started. So today, what you're here to listen to is to learn more about the VOREC Community Grant Programs 2023 grant round. We're going to start with just an overview of where we've been and where we're going with this grant program. This is the first year that we've had grant tracks, so I want to explain a little bit about why we're doing that. Then we're going to go into timelines and important dates to note, some tips about the application, how to find more information, and then we'll open it up for the question and answer period. You can follow along with how we're doing on this agenda by each note is on a light green slide, and all the rest of the slides are dark green. Again, there's that number for language services in case you or your partners need it. Please call. The Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, or VOREC, was founded by executive order, and it's a collective action network that's working to lift up the outdoor recreation economy in Vermont. And that includes the people who are providing recreation, like trail organizations and communities, as well as outdoor businesses that are providing the backbone of the outdoor recreation economy. The VOREC is led by a steering committee of cross-sector representatives of all of those sectors that I just mentioned, and is it's follows the core pillars of VOREC, which I've listed here. And all of our grants that we're asking you to write, no matter what track you're in, we're asking you to connect to one of the core pillars of VOREC. So you'll note that all of that representation is noted in these core pillars: the businesses, the communities, and the outdoor recreation resources, and all of the benefits that those core pillars entail. So that's one of the really critical parts of the application. The VOREC Community Grant Program is a part of the VOREC program, but it's certainly just one part. The VOREC program also is a connector of many different organizations and has done a lot of work to lift up the outdoor recreation economy beyond the grant program. The grant program began in 2018 and has been supported extensively by the legislature and has grown, to this year providing up to $6 million to communities across Vermont. Through all of the grant rounds that we've had so far, we've learned a lot. And so this grant round will look different than previous grant rounds, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And we really strive to listen to applicants as well as our communities to learn what they need to promote those pillars of VOREC. And that's what this grant program represents. As I said, this grant program is really lifting up those 5 pillars of VOREC and giving communities the resources they need to achieve what they view as their outdoor recreation economy. We encourage projects that are cross-sector, so projects that include both the recreation resources, the communities, the schools, the health centers, and the downtowns, and connect them. Those projects are highly encouraged for this grant round, particularly in the implementation and the project development tracks. With this application, you have to choose one track, but we know that there's a lot of projects out there that could fall into multiple tracks, and that's okay. We're not allotting a certain amount of money per track. We want to find out what the communities tell us they need through their applications. And so you're not going to be, there's not going to be any negative consequences to choosing a track. If we feel that your project would be better suited for another track, we'll tell you and we'll work with you to see if we can switch it. The 4 tracks that I mentioned are implementation, project development, outdoor equity, and flood recovery. Implementation track projects are the most like previous VOREC community grant projects of all the tracks. They should be ready to implement starting in summer 2024. That means that if you have any construction, you should have permits in hand or have a plan for having permits in hand by the time that construction happens in the summer of 2024. Any engineering plans, any outreach to people in your community base that would help you decide what the project should look like should have already happened for these project implementation track projects. The minimum for these is $50,000, which again is very similar to our previous grant rounds. And also municipalities and nonprofits are eligible as lead applicants. We encourage, especially for the more complicated, multifaceted projects, to have a really cross-sector project team, but the lead applicant should be a municipality or a nonprofit. Project development track projects aren't quite ready to be implemented in the summer of 2024. And in particular, this should go for projects that have a significant planning process that needs to unfold in order to be ready to implement. We got a lot of really good project applications last round that just weren't quite ready. And so we want to be able to fund those projects and make sure that they can be ready for future grant rounds. So these projects would support things like making architectural or engineering plans for new buildings or renovated buildings that support the outdoor recreation economy, doing a public scoping and planning process for your community. There's a $20,000 minimum for these projects, and municipalities and nonprofits are eligible as lead applicants again. And again, because it mirrors the implementation track projects, but is an earlier stage of those projects, we encourage multifaceted cross-sector teams. Outdoor equity track projects, another new track, are projects that reduce barriers and expand opportunities for people to get outside. In particular, these should be projects that support BIPOC, LGBTQ plus people, people with low incomes, speakers of languages beyond English, and people with disabilities. We really want to see projects that engage with those populations and ideally are led by people with those populations. There's no minimum for these grant tracks, and this is the only grant track in which businesses are eligible to apply. Municipalities and nonprofits are also eligible. We are doing this grant track in partnership with the State Office of Racial Equity, and they will be helping with the assessment of the grants and hopefully as well with support for applicants through the grant agreement stage. Finally, we pivoted this summer as we were planning for VOREC to also incorporate flood recovery into this VOREC grant round. We are using this already planned grant round to expand to flood recovery. So flood recovery projects will look a little bit different than the other three. Projects, we would like to see projects that repair, replace, and make more resilient infrastructure that was damaged during the floods of this summer, anytime between July 10th and August 15th. And we will reimburse for expenses starting in July. This is the only grant track that will do that. All the rest of the grant tracks will reimburse from expenses starting at the signing of the grant agreement. And we really are looking for folks to be thinking about resilience. And so we want to fund projects that are replacing, for example, if a culvert was washed out during the floods, replacing that with a bridge that can better withstand large amounts of water going underneath. We are also willing to reimburse for expenses that were a quick repair and then a better replacement. So if, for example, you replace that culvert with another culvert really quickly in the fall, but then are using the winter to plan for engineering plans for a bridge, we can reimburse for all of those expenses. Just note that we will need documentation of those expenses. And so if your organization isn't prepared to provide the documentation that those funds were expended on flood recovery, we're not going to be able to reimburse. If you have questions about that, we have an open office hours specific to flood recovery, and I'd recommend coming to that if you have super specific questions about what documentation is required for that track. Each of these grant tracks has priorities that we're asking you to answer in your project narrative. The implementation track priorities are community planning, that the projects should demonstrate that the community supports this project. Economic and community need, sustainability and environmental stewardship, innovation and creativity, and inclusivity and increased participation. These are really important, and they're in the grant application guidance that we have posted on our website for each of the grant tracks. But please note that projects that explain and clearly articulate how they are advancing these priorities will score higher. This is what we want to see these projects do. You'll see that the project development track priorities are exactly the same. Again, because these are the same types of projects, just in an earlier stage of development. The outdoor equity track priorities are slightly different. Obviously, the inclusivity and increased participation is the #1 priority of the outdoor equity track. We also are promoting or prioritizing projects that have partnership and public engagement, particularly, as I mentioned, for the communities that they are intended to serve. Sustainability and environmental stewardship is critical in all of our outdoor recreation grants. And innovation and creativity, we always want to, through the VOREC program, prioritize projects that are innovative in their communities. Finally, in the flood recovery, again, I just want to call out that resilience is going to be a really high priority for us. We really want to see how these projects are going to replace infrastructure in a more resilient way. If that's not possible, we want to hear why that infrastructure is so important to your community that we're replacing it, even though it may be damaged again in a future flood event. Again, all of these priorities are listed both in the application and in the application guidance posted on our website. So for the timeline, we launched last week and the applications are open through December 15th. There, as I mentioned, multiple open office hours between now and the application due date, which is, again, December 15th. Remember that, December 15th. After that, we will go through a significant grant review and selection period. We are expecting a lot of applications. We have up to $6 million to disperse to communities across the state. But we are planning to announce those grants by the end of February. Then we have through the end of May to develop the grant agreements and are planning to have all of them signed by the end of May. That means that project implementation will be, we always give at least 2 field seasons. So the first field season will be this next summer, 2024. The second field season will be the field season for 2025. And they'll be ending on December 31st, 2025. Again, I had already mentioned flood recovery track projects are eligible for expenses starting from July 11th, 2023. Really important date that's coming up. For small rural communities of people less than 5,000, you can potentially get support from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board Rural Economic Development Initiative program, or I guess just initiative. Please email Mariah, and I see her email's up here. It's also on our website by this Friday, because what she does then is connects eligible communities to grant writers who can help through the grant process for the next 2 months of figuring out how to best articulate the needs of your community. Another potential municipal assistance program is through the state. And this is new. It was clear during COVID when federal monies were coming in that some towns needed help because they just didn't have enough staff to apply for grants. And there's like approximately 30 communities on the list. So if your community is on that list, then you can apply, and you should email that email up there, which is also on our website. And again, open office hours. The themed open office hours will be covering that theme for the first half an hour, and then open to all questions for the second half an hour of the open office hours. So we're starting with flood recovery, then moving to the outdoor equity track, construction projects, because construction projects have additional documentation needs in the application. And then our last one will be just an open question and answer period. We have added to the application guidance the point system for how we'll be weighting the different parts of the application. You'll see that the project narrative for those priorities that I listed, which is connected to those priorities that I listed, has the most weight of the entire application. So please pay attention to that section. In the online application, it's the last section. So don't get tired before you get there. It's the most important part. All of the whole application you know, including, say, the project team management and urgency should match how complicated your project is. For example, if there's a flood recovery project that is being implemented by the town, the municipality, on municipally owned lands, you won't need a project team nearly as large as a large-scale implementation project that's bringing together multiple partners. We understand that, and so when you're filling in the application, please note that we will be looking at your scope of work in your work plan and making sure that the other questions match the needs of your work plan. We put a lot of effort into the grant program application guidance. Please read it. I know it's like 15 pages, but I think it should be really helpful and answer a lot of questions. We organized the application this year so that the work plan and budget are the how you're going to do something, and the project narrative is the why. So please note that the work plan and budget are also really important parts of the application, because no matter how great your idea is, if you don't know how you're going to implement it, we're not going to be able to fund it. I already said the third bullet. And then just another note that construction and land acquisition projects have additional questions on the application. If you click yes to either of those, a whole other page of questions comes up. All construction projects require permitting to be in place, or a plan for permitting to be in place. Again, we'll have a construction projects open office hours to answer specific questions about that. But that's an important note. This is similar to all of our grant programs. So if you've applied for other grant programs like the Recreational Trails Program, the requirements are similar. Just a note on the online A&R online, you can go back and edit your application multiple times before you submit, but once you submit, you can't edit it anymore. So make sure that everything's in place before you click submit. There's a lot of information up on our website now. There's a frequently asked questions document, the application guidance document. There's links to previously successful app projects. Of course, those will be more like implementation projects, but they still are really good examples of cool projects that VOREC has funded across the state. And so please check out our website. The QR code goes to our website. Again, the open office hours. If none of these things work for you, please email us at the anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. That's our shared email, and so that will make sure that your question gets to the right person. And with that, all of that talking, it's time for questions and answers. Lauren and Jackie are here to help me answer questions if they're the right ones. It looked like there was a lot coming in chat as I was doing my spiel, so maybe we can start with those.
Yeah, and I've been trying to bundle them up to get some light topics together. So let's start with some eligibility questions that came out of the chat. So we have a question from Leo. Are organizations with current or active VOREC grants eligible to apply?
Do you want me to take that one, Claire? Or?
Sure.
Great. So yes, if you have received a VOREC community grant in the past, that does not preclude you from applying. What it does do, so the goal of this program is to make the biggest impact possible across the state. And if you have received a VOREC community grant, especially in the last round in fiscal year 2022, it is likely that we will consider your application the percentage complete that your project is at the time we review. as well as the other applications that we've received, because again, we are trying to make the biggest impact possible statewide. And that will be important as we review and consider applications. Claire, anything else to add?
No, that sounds good.
All right, we got another eligibility question. This one is from Joe. Can a nonprofit apply on behalf of multiple municipalities for a shared project?
Yes. Again, the more complex a project, the more established we'd like to ensure that project team is and that those plans are. We're not anticipating that this would be like a sub-granting program, like the project should be planned at the time of the application. But there can be an entity that is then, dispersing the projects across a region. Again, we'd like to focus on communities, and so we understand that it doesn't have to be specific to a town in order for it to be a community, but we're really looking to support, community-based projects. If that helps with if you're thinking, statewide, that would be a little bit different towns within a region. There are if you have specific questions about your project, of course, we can look at that a little bit more specifically, but generally the answer is yes, we will accept those applications.
Thanks, Claire. The next bundle of questions are around really about people putting together their concepts. And so first question that we had was, can applicants submit proposals for more than one project?
So this is a tricky one with the multiple grant tracks this year. So if you have a flood recovery track project and another track project, yes, we will accept that. The flood, as I mentioned, the flood recovery track is really an opportunity to support that recovery from the devastating floods. And we don't want people who suffered in those floods to not have the opportunity to also apply for grants that build their outdoor recreation economies. In the flood recovery track specifically, if you have multiple places that you manage that were damaged, we are asking you to put those all into one application. We want one application per entity, and because that way we can get the money out to you faster. For the other tracks, I would encourage you to think of one project across those three tracks.
Claire, I'll just also add that, these applications are pretty robust to fill out, as well as one of our criteria in reviewing applications is, to consider projects statewide, like I was saying before. It is to your benefit to try to submit your project to the right track, and for your organization or your community, trying to spread those out over multiple applications doesn't really up your chances or change the opportunity, because again, we are looking to spread this money out across the state. So trying to make the most of the application that you submit is to your benefit.
Thanks for that. I'm going to pop in one that just came at the end that I think is a direct follow-up to that is in terms of the mention of community. Sharon asked, is community strictly defined by geography, or can it be also defined by specific user group? For example, the accessibility, people with physical, cognitive, visual barriers to get to and enjoy trails.
I'm going to follow up one more thing on what Jackie said, is that if you are a lot of organizations across Vermont work like with different people, and so you could be a lead applicant on one project and then an advisor or a project team member on another application, and that's fine. But we're asking for the lead applicants, as Jackie said, to focus on that application and making the most out of that application. I just know that there's a lot of people working with a lot of partners, and so we certainly wouldn't limit you in that way. That's the project team though, not the lead application. To answer the question about like what is a community, I think we all know that people's communities are defined by the people who are in them. And so we're not limiting things to just towns. Like I said, like there are sometimes are groups of towns that act as a community geographically, and there's certainly communities that exist within user groups, within needs, within, you know, experiences, life experiences. So again, the communities we want to make sure that there's an engagement with the community that you're saying that this project supports. If you are part of it, whether you're part of it or whether you're learning about it, you know, like you need to show that this is something the community you're talking about wants to see and solves a potential problem for them. And we want to see that articulated in the application.
Right, the next bundle of questions are around budgets. So there's a whole pocket of them that are asking things like, what is typical spending within the grant, like allowances for materials, salaries, equipment, subcontracting, et cetera. Would a project need to have only 25% VOREC funding and is viewed as more favorable as say than like 75%? So kind of getting at that match piece. And then there was another follow-up link of like budget resources for grant pieces. So since all of those are kind of tied together, I figured I'll give them all at once.
Eligible expenses are listed in a table on the application guidance document. They are different for each grant track, so please look at that. For example, land acquisition is an eligible expense for the implementation and the outdoor equity tracks, but not for project development or for flood recovery. That's just one I had off the top of my mind, but all of those things that Lauren just mentioned are listed in that eligibility table. The other thing to note in your project is we have a maximum administrative costs. And so please call that out in your budget. Don't just incorporate it into the cost for each line item. It should be a separate line item. Administrative cost, 10%. Up to $40,000.
Just to be clear about when we say administrative costs, what we're talking about. So there is the project management, which is eligible to include, but the administration costs can only be up to 10% of the total requested amount. What we mean when we say administrative costs is the cost of coordinating with FPR and the grant, the cost of managing the actual, reimbursement requests, those kinds of things related to the grant. So that's different in our minds from project management. It's something that has been a little unclear in the past, so we want to try and be as clear as possible about this grant round.
And just as a note, it's up to 10% and up to $40,000. So if your grant is for more than $400,000, the cap is at 40 for administrative costs. You had another question on the budget questions, Lauren, and I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, it came down to I would describe it as like a preferred match or a preferred percentage of the budget that we'd like to see VOREC funds cover out of the total project cost.
So there's no match requirement for any of the project tracks. So match can show community support, and it certainly does. So if you have a project that you've been working on funding through different means and you have some funding secured, by all means, that doesn't mean you shouldn't finish it up with a VOREC grant, but also we're not requiring anyone to have that. So there's no specific budget priority given to projects that have match versus projects that don't. Like I said, the project match just shows that there's community support, and so that's part of that, fulfilling the community need that we have as priorities across all the grant tracks.
And I just want to add, not having a match requirement is on purpose. We're trying this funding as easy to access and use as we can. It is a benefit of this program that you don't always get with federal funding. The other thing to know in the past with applicants who have applied is we've decided to fund projects that showed a lot of match, and it was certainly something that made them competitive in the review round. It's a good sign of community support and buy-in into the work you want to do. But we've also funded projects that didn't bring a lot of match to the table, but were able to describe that community buy-in and input in a different way.
The other thing to note that I didn't call out in my presentation is that we don't have a maximum amount for any of the grant tracks. Well, obviously, I guess our maximum would be $6 million, but we're not going to give $6 million to one community either. So we know that it's somewhere less than that. We encourage people to think big with these projects. This is a great opportunity given to us by the legislature and the funds from one of the COVID relief bills. I'm not sure which one. So let's take advantage of this opportunity. Think big for your communities, but don't send in projects that aren't doable by your community either. So they should be within the scope of effort that you can extend for the next 2 years from now, and really make a big splash in your communities. So think big, but think possible too.
The next bundle of questions I've got before we go to, I know there's a lot. If you're putting stuff in the chat, I'm still watching it come in, but I want to try to get these put together as best I can, are really around application preparation. So one of the questions was is there an LOI that's going to be a part of this process?
In the past, we've had LOIs, and we're not requiring LOIs this year. This is in part because of our desire to get the applications through and the grants out the door quickly, especially in response to the floods. And so all of the applications will be coming in as full applications.
And as people are putting these applications together, do we have templates online for them? So there were questions in the chat asking if we have a Word template of all the application questions that people can use to be able to copy and paste into the online portal. In the same way, do we have a budget template that's available online?
There is a budget template. That's the easy one. If you go to A&R, if you click on the application link and make an account with A&R Online, that's where the budget template is. I'd encourage you to do that and look at the application when you're deciding. It doesn't, cost anything to just make a A&R Online account and then look at the application. We don't currently have a Word document template of the application. We can consider whether we want to work on that. I would encourage you all to work on your your questions outside of the online application so you can share it across your project teams and you can retain your answers as once you put them in. So maybe we can look into transferring it out as a resource.
Thanks. And then the last kind of additional support as people are putting things together, it was just asking about the open office hours again, and if those sessions are going to be followed by a posted Q&A.
So we are going to record all of those and post the recordings and transcripts on our website after each session. And any other questions that we get outside of this webinar and the open office hours will add to the frequently asked questions document. So if questions come in on email, for example, we want to be as transparent as possible with all of our answers. And so we'll add them to the frequently asked questions document, probably weekly.
All right, now we're going to go into some rather specific questions that folks have that are really awesome that I think are going to be applicable across, but I'm just going to kind of work through them. And so they're going to jump around. So this one from Sharon, if a grant is proposed by multiple organizations, each of whom will deliver a big chunk of the deliverables, is it better to have one organization apply and disperse funding as contracts out, or to have multiple applicants?
If it's all within the same project, there should be a lead applicant who then contracts to project partners. And that should be laid out in the budget. If they are separate projects, obviously they should be different lead applicants.
I would also add, and I totally like what Claire said, is accurate. And I think if you are in the position of, you're considering being this lead applicant, you're having conversations with multiple groups, I think considering, this is a 2-year timeline. Being the lead applicant on a project means that you're taking on the responsibility of communicating about the deliverables of the grant. You are taking on the coordination of reimbursements. That means coordinating, getting materials from your partners to organize, and then communicating with the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation on those reimbursement requests once the grant agreement is executed and you start to do the work. I mention that because it's worthwhile to think about your capacity and how you're going to support having that capacity. Just be thoughtful about, what is it really going to take to be in this partnerships, and we are encouraging that. We are encouraging people to collaborate, and that is something that we're excited about these grants. But we also want those lead applicants to be realistic in that capacity and have a plan for being able to accomplish those things once the grant agreement is executed.
And as a note, the lead applicant's responsible for the sub agreements, and they need to fulfill all of the requirements of the grant agreement. So anything that the lead applicant signs and agrees to in the application, the sub agreements need to fulfill that as well. That's a state policy.
Okay, I think the next flurry of questions are going to hop around, but it's all about tracks and how things fit into different tracks. So we have a question here about really about the planning one, with someone who says they're looking to create a master plan and using the grant to get a consultant to assist, but they haven't done an RFP yet, thinking that the grant would help them do that. And so how do they price their budget when they apply for the grant?
I'd encourage you to reach out to some possible contractors, because the thing is that you know, if the sky is the limit, like the sky is the limit, and you could you could make a master plan for, you know, $1 million in some cases that maybe isn't necessary for your community, depending on what the size is. So yes, you don't have to do an RFP necessarily, but if you reach out to a few contractors, tell them what your scope of work is and ask them for a budget. That is something that they do. That is they may not always like it, but they have to do that in order to keep their clientele. So please come to us with something realistic. That's what we're asking you to do that. So that's why we're asking you to do that research. But it doesn't have, you know, you don't have to have like a proposal already accepted by any means.
I'll just add, yes, we want you to be as realistic as possible and explore with potential consultants what that cost might be. In exploring that cost, I think something we often see is that costs change. And so as you're talking with those consultants, as you're getting those RFPs and an idea of cost, I think it's worthwhile to ask you how those costs have changed maybe over the past year, so that you can understand how that might change as we get, you know, if your project is awarded, and as we get closer to executing a grant agreement, how that cost might change. So try and get a sense of, you know, what that buffer is on that RFP cost.
Yeah, and that's especially true for construction projects. Construction costs have skyrocketed in the last 5 years, let alone just since the floods. And so please don't use estimates from even spring of 2023. Those will not be accurate going into next year.
Well, and just to follow up from the chat, one of our participants offered for people looking for consultants that Common Good Vermont just put together a list of consultants to reach that could be a potential starting place. And the next question that I'm seeing as I'm working down from the top is about choosing tracks. If an organization has 2 discrete projects on 2 different properties, would it be advantageous to say combine projects into one application or pursue separate applications for each project?
That really depends on the project. Again, like we encourage people to apply for just for one project because we want to extend the scope of our giving across the whole state. But if the projects are similar enough, you know, like, for example, if you're working on better accessibility through your signage, you would want to do that across multiple properties that you own. Like if you're adding translation or making more accessible signs. And so it's just very, I feel like that question really depends on what you're defining as your project on each property. So if you have a specific question like that, you either come to an open office hours or write us an email, please.
Well, and we've got another question about tracks, about combining tracks. You mentioned that many projects probably will fit into multiple places, but a question in the chat says, you know, like, can a project combine tracks? For instance, can a project be mostly in the project development track, but include some implementation aspects of the project that are shovel ready?
No. So project development, you'll see in the eligibility table that project development tracks do not have implementation components, because if we don't know what the planning scoping is going to say, we're unwilling, we don't want to fund the results that we don't know are the results. We really believe in planning, and we think that it's a really important component of all of these projects, and we want to fund that. So project development track projects are for planning. And unfortunately, because of that, if you have planning involved, you have to be in that track. And if you have implementation involved, you have to be in the implementation track in this grant round.
Claire, I'll just add to that because, you know, again, going back to the presentation earlier, we have been through 3 grant rounds with this grant program, and we've tried every round to learn from the, you know, what the feedback we've gotten, the applications we've received, the execution of those grant agreements to successful projects. And one thing we've learned, going back to what Claire said previously, is that there is a lot of value in funding that project development work, in supporting that. And what we're trying to do is create a continuum where, you know, if you invest in project development and you get your project to the point of implementation, you're much more competitive in a future application for an implementation project. And so from our perspective, it is really worthwhile to take the time to invest in that project development, move your project forward to that point, and then reapply for funding. And our hope is that the VOREC Community Grant Program continues. You know, we have been using one-time funding to date, but it is a pretty popular program, and we are hopeful this funding continues. So, you know, our expectation is that you go through that project development work, and then you're able to come back and apply for an implementation grant.
Well, and that's a great transition. We've had a couple of questions really about like progress and impact to kind of continue to tell that story and continue to learn from this. And so the first one is about progress reports. So it's just asking, I guess, about the mechanics of it. So in the 2022 grants, they were not able to save a progress report they're working on to continue later. Is that going to be something that's going to continue forward? Do we know anything about that at this point?
I think that if the Microsoft Forms aren't working for you, if you're a 2022 grant recipient, let's talk about that when we talk about the 2022 grants. If that is the main reason that you wouldn't want to apply for a 2023 grant, please email us and let us know that, and we'll prioritize fixing that issue with not being able to save.
When another person in the chat asked about the purpose of the grants are to make the most impact, how will VOREC measure impact? Number of participants annually, amount of tax revenue from increased visitors, etc.
There's so many ways of measuring impact, and one of the questions on the application is how you will measure impact. And I want to be clear that we're not just looking for numbers. You'll see in our example that we wrote up, there are some numbers of how many people reached by our example project, but like another impact, like way of measuring impact was whether people were interested in returning the next year, or whether people heard about it and like told their friends, if they got referrals, you know, things like that, that, you know, aren't necessarily easily measurable, but part of a community and part of the fabric of a community. So please tell us how you will measure the impact. We are open to many ways, but we want you to be thinking about that in your application.
Another question I'm seeing here is goes back to the contracting piece that we talked about in the sub-agreements that came up earlier. Is FPR involved in developing the language of the sub-agreements, or is that something the applicants put together?
That's the responsibility of the applicants. And, you know, a contractor would be a different, you know, scope of agreement than, you know, a partnership agreement. So I think there's so many possibilities. There are some requirements that are listed in the grant agreement, like I said, that need to go into sub-agreements.
We had a question just as I think you touched on this at the beginning, but how will folks be able to get a copy of this webinar and any follow-up from it?
Great, yeah, good question. We are going to post the link to, we'll probably upload it to YouTube and then post that link on our website, the VOREC Community Grant Program website, which is at the FPR website, but if you Google it, you'll get there. And we'll also post the transcript. So it will be both the video and the transcript, because sometimes it's easier to read than to listen.
It's also linked on the VOREC program website. So if you find your way there, there's also multiple links on that page to the VOREC Community Grant webpage.
As I'm going back through the chat, the kind of lingering questions that I'm seeing that we haven't touched on yet are really specific to particular applicants. Like, how do we need to, you know, validate budget pieces for flood recovery? How the specifics of like trail maintenance and trail work for different proposals. And so if folks do have those really specific questions that they want to ask, what's their best strategy moving forward?
Great question. So please, please, please come to our open office hours, because we're designing them so other people with those specific trail construction questions or flood recovery questions will be there to also listen. If those times don't work for you, please email us at anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. That is, I can try and go back a second. So you can see all of our contact information. Well, with that, I totally understand if your specific questions weren't answered. We know that there's a lot. And so again, come to open office hours or shoot us an email if those don't work for you. And we'll try and get specific questions back out to you, as well as post on our frequently asked questions if they come in through email. We're really excited to see all of the great ideas that I know so many of you have. And we're really pleased to provide this opportunity to communities across Vermont. So please, if you are confused about any of the language, any of the explanations on our website, on our materials, please let us know and we'll try and fix it. And we're just, like I said, excited to see what's in store with the applications. Due December 15th, 2 months. So good luck in all of your application development.
Thanks, everyone.